Hey fam, welcome to the Freetrail Podcast and our new presenting sponsor. We're so happy to now be working with The Feed. Thefeed.com/Freetrail is where you need to go. It is the one-stop shop for all your training and racing nutrition needs. They have over 200 of the world's best nutrition brands stocked in one website. It's a fantastic resource. We've been big customers for a long time. We're really proud to work with them. Some of my favorite products that you can find at thefeed.com/Freetrail. Gnarly Nutrition Whey Protein Powder. I like the chocolate flavor. I have some of this after every one of my workouts and long runs. For in-run nutrition, Orange Drank. You'll see my big dumb face on it. Also from Gnarly Nutrition, enhanced sodium concentration here in the world's best fueling drink mix. Finally, HVMN, Ketone IQ. I have 2 of these ketone shots basically every single day, once before I go running and once in the middle of the afternoon when I need a little extra energy. Go to thefeed.com/Freetrail and you're going to get an $80 credit, free money to spend at thefeed.com. It'll be $20 right away and then $20 every 90 days thereafter. You'll also get a sweet Trail Running Will Save the World water bottle. Again, that's thefeed.com/Freetrail. You'll get $80 credit to spend on your favorite nutrition products. And if you are international, they do ship internationally as well. So you can take care or at least take advantage of that great offering from The Feed. Big thanks to The Feed for supporting, and thank you for watching the podcast. Rod Farvard, at long last, welcome to the Freetrail Podcast, buddy. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say in the radio industry.
Yeah, it's technically your second appearance. You came on for the Post Canyons Champions interview, but this time we go long form, buddy, and I can't freaking wait to do it with you. As you know, we start in a traditional place here on the Freetrail Pod, and I haven't recorded like a traditional one-on-one long form pod in a bit, so I'm excited to dive back into it. That opening question, of course, is what makes you you?
Yeah, I feel like I should be better prepared for this question since I listen to the pod so much and I should have known it's coming. But this is one of those questions where I'm going to say something and then like tomorrow on the trail, I'm going to be like, oh, I should have said that. But I'll leave it at this. I don't think I'm ever really content with who I am or where I am. I think I always want to be self-improving, even if I just achieve something that, I've aspired to achieve for a really long time. And it's hard to say like where that comes from, but I feel like I operate a lot on more of like a fear spectrum where like fear is my motivator. And I want to, do everything I can to like remove the fear. And I think it comes from like not really wanting to settle with where I am and wanting to be different and wanting to make an impact wherever I go. So it's kind of an interesting ethos to operate with, but I could say a bunch of things that I feel like are more positive and motivate me. But if I really think about what makes me different, I think it's probably that mindset.
I so resonate with that. To what degree has that been a blessing versus a curse in your life? Because obviously never being satisfied, always striving is what leads to massive breakthroughs, but it can also contribute to just an incessant dissatisfaction with your current circumstances.
Yeah, I think it's easier to start with where I wish I didn't function in this way. And, it makes it really hard to just like sit and be happy with what you just did and be present in the moment. Like even after a race like Western States, I'm constantly just kind of thinking about, the next step and like what I could have done late stage rather than being like extremely satisfied with the result and celebrating and just being pretty happy. But I think the converse of it is pretty obvious. Like, it's always causing you it's lighting a fire underneath your butt and getting you out the door every day. So yeah, pros and cons. And I kind of hope there's a day where I'm happy with where I'm at, but I don't think it's quite there yet.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm always thinking about places where we can start these conversations. And I spent a long time over the last couple of days just reading a lot of stuff that you've written. And one thing that I thought would be an interesting jumping off point here was something that you wrote, and this was after your Black Canyon 100K performance earlier in this spring. And what you said is, I think this is appropriate and will be an important, touchstone theme throughout the conversation. But what you said is, to compete and give yourself a shot at glory, you need to do something dumb and hope it sticks. Expand on that position and maybe how Black Canyon created the conditions for what you were able to do at canyons in Western states. To what extent do we need to do dumb things?
Yeah. I think if you read a little bit further in that, you would say you would see a quote that says there is being dumb within reason. So you got to know yourself. And I don't think there is a point where you need to put a limit on yourself necessarily in a race. But after doing this for so many years, 9 years, I feel like I know what I can and can't do. And, prior to races like canyons in Western states, even just a few months ago at Black Canyon, I feel like I would operate more on the take it easy side of the spectrum. And let's just like play into it and let's race our way into the front. And that like historically has worked okay for me. Granted, I've never had like massive breakthrough races. I feel like I've had a lot of solid races, and using that sort of tactic was always pretty solid to get me there. And one could argue a 14th place at Black Canyon in that field is okay. 14th place is also just like a very mediocre place, so one can argue that it wasn't a good result, but it got me into that solid position regardless. And I had like a solid race. I still PR'd my 100K there. But if you really want to get to the next step, I think you got to start the race operating on the other side of the spectrum, which is like your upper limit, and just kind of seeing like how long you can hold that. And I feel like there's a lot of stuff I did in between that allowed me to kind of have a little bit more confidence in doing something like that. But it is like a very scary thing to do when you've never done it before and you have no data around, can you hold it this long or not?
Okay, perfect. So we're going to come back to that in a little bit. You mentioned you've been in the sport for 9 years. I'm conscious of the fact that you've probably earned a lot of new fans in the past 3 months or so. So going back in time, as is our tradition here on the podcast, setting a little personal context, tell the listeners a little bit about your personal background, your upbringing, your history with sport, things like that.
Yeah, I started probably just like everyone else, cross country and track, and in high school. And I was never a really solid runner. I just actually entered the sport to try to get in shape for trying out for other sports in high school. And I eventually found a very strong community in the cross country team, and it made me want to stay and stick with it and go to practices. I think early on, I didn't take it super seriously, but I didn't like that aspect about myself. I distinctly remember a day after a race my sophomore year of high school, and just like wondering why I sucked, and like why I wasn't better. And I just hated that feeling of mediocrity. And I started to do things that, was pretty unique on our cross country team, and, read a lot of literature around high mileage training, seeing what other teams were doing. And I remember that summer after sophomore year, I just kind of went all into it and was super obsessive about my mileage and doubling and doing all these little things. And I made like marginal gains the next season. I was like borderline varsity, but I still wasn't really there. And that was kind of like the story of my high school career. I was just like always on the cusp and on the edge, but I was doing everything I could and going all in on it. And I just really loved the process. And after I graduated high school, I tried to walk on to our cross country team at UC Santa Barbara and didn't make that team, but continued to run because, again, I just like loved the process more than anything. I eventually got pretty bored of running solo, so I thought about some other sports I could do in college, and I joined the triathlon team, and again went kind of all in on that. And I feel like every step of the way, like I was always a little bit of an outlier in the group. all the teams I've been on historically have been like pretty like casual teams, and I always brought this like higher intensity to it that some people liked, some people didn't like about me, but it was definitely like a key characteristic. And yeah, I was decent at try, nothing stand out. I think like something my coach would say back then is that, just to kind of calm my ego down, is that you are a big fish in a small pond right now, but if you were to get out of here, you're a small fish in a very big ocean. So it was kind of like this dynamic with him that he really understood me and understood how to hold me back and how to get me going. And eventually we ended up like doing an Ironman circuit together and going all in on that. I did get my pro card as a triathlete, but at the same time, I was starting work outside of, sport, and didn't really have time to train at that high level. And I always felt like if I wasn't training at a high level, I was kind of wasting my potential. So I ended up just stepping away from the sport and returning back to running, which brings us to kind of like 2018, where I really started taking ultra seriously.
Say a little bit more about the intensity that you bring to the training, because in reading a lot of the stuff that you've written, it's clear that you think in a deeply technical and analytical way. And I was talking to Tim Tollefson a little bit before we started recording here, who mentioned that that's sort of a core part of what makes Rod special, is that you really do leave no stone unturned. Where does that come from in your personality?
Yeah. It's funny because in other aspects of my life, I'm not really like that. I think a lot of people would say I'm a little too casual in other aspects of my life, and I could probably clean it up. But in sport, and especially ultra, I think, and in sport that I've always done, like kind of the longer distance racing and the endurance racing. Again, if we like go back to kind of like my origin story and where I was in high school, I was never a standout athlete, but I wanted to be. And like as hard as I trained and as as like hard as I pushed it, I just didn't really have that physical talent that a lot of athletes did, or I developed too young for where I was. So I was constantly looking for things that other people weren't doing. As there are so many gaps in sport, in this sport, that I feel like can be filled outside of the talent aspect. So, and my coach operates in the same way, and he's been my coach for years. So we together, we love diving into the details, and we love finding these little gaps and seeing what we could do there. I think like I'm also just really driven and passionate about exercise physiology and the science behind things. So it doesn't feel like an extra chore for me. It's like genuinely really interesting for me to figure out what my body does and how I can do things better, even though I have like maybe this physical ceiling today.
So interesting. The analogy that Tim used, or the comparison that he made, was to Tom Evans, which is high praise. Obviously, Tom being known for being the consummate professional who operates with the philosophy of basics done well, who leaves no stone unturned. And again, in your writing, it's clear that you and your coach are deeply steeped in the data. So maybe talk about that a little bit. Like, to what degree do you interact with data in your training and racing? How do you balance the quantitative measurable things with the more qualitative sensation-based feedback?
Mm-hmm. From a training perspective, we don't dive too much into it. We do a lot based on just RPE and perceived effort. We use heart rate just to like view the data after the fact, but I think the more like we realize things in the sport, it actually boils down to very simple processes, and that's just building an aerobic engine. So like there's really two big ways to do that, and that's one to do VO2 max work, and the other just to do very slow, easy volume. Like we don't do a lot of stuff in the middle, and we try hard not to do a lot of stuff in the middle. Like he really wants my easy days easy. He doesn't want me like pushing anything on like a tempo type of effort. When we do intervals, it should be like a 9 out of 10 intensity. And if I'm unable to reach that, that means we're probably doing something wrong during the week. So it's from that perspective, like the training is very simple. The data around it is more just to, see how my body might be responding. But where we really start to get analytical and like, a little bit more specific than I think a lot of people are doing is just like how we approach long runs and how we utilize these opportunities to practice race day simulation. Like basically, it's not like we're super intense, like, okay, you got to go hit this like pace necessarily, but we don't ever do runs when I'm training for a block where I might be going out for, hours and I'm unable to resupply, or like the kind of like fun aspects of the long run have very much been stripped as we like focus more into these like golden ticket races in Western states. Like we want to simulate it like you're hitting an aid station every hour, can refuel, can you get in and out of that really quickly, and know exactly how much I'm eating, know exactly how much I'm drinking, get data on like what feels better. Maybe I need 1 liter an hour in these temperatures. Maybe I need 1.5 liters an hour in these temperatures. Can I push carbs into heat? And that's like really, I think, where we've gotten more specific than years in the past. And from what I see other people doing, like it's not a lot of fun. When I drag Tim out there on long runs with me, he's very patient, but like he's like, I don't know, I'm sure he's like, I wish I'd rather be doing something else. So it's specific now, and I think that's like the biggest thing we changed. Yeah.
Introduce us to your coach a little bit more. I think it's interesting because he is a carryover from your triathlon days, from what I understand. He's not necessarily somebody who a lot of our listeners are going to be familiar with, but the things that you're describing are novel to me. So maybe you can introduce us to your coach and also like apply some practical details to those runs, like when you're setting up the contrived, superficial, pretend aid stations, what does that look like?
Yeah. So my coach is Matt Eisen. When I was at the UTSB tri team, I was the president my final year, and we were hiring on a new coach. So Matt came into our lives, and we really vibed with him. We felt like he was a good fit for the team. And at the time, I was 21, he was 26, so we like not a big age gap. And I think like as we grew together, as he was my coach, we very much like went through a lot of stuff together, and he saw me grow. I saw him grow as a coach. And, ever since really, like we really connected. He's understood me, understood how I train. And that's kind of the approach he takes with everyone. Like, I think he does have like a standard template, but he is very much a thought partner with athletes, and wants to get to know them and understand like the stresses in your life, like, really what days you're able to do hard workouts, what days you can do long runs. And it's a very personalized approach where I feel like the ultra scene today with coaching is pretty it's not very saturated. Actually, there aren't like a lot of very well-known coaches in the space. And I think like some people like me can partner with someone they've met for a long time. And then there's kind of like the top coaches who it's very hard to maybe develop that like next personal relationship with. So I think that aspect is like incredibly important and has allowed us to communicate together and get to this level together where, we understand where there are gaps and where we can work together to fill them, and make, big improvements in the space, rather than just getting like a template of a workout every week and having to do that. So, yeah, I would, pick your coach wisely, I would say, is like the big takeaway there. And don't be afraid to share like everything about yourself with them. It's not just a training relationship.
Awesome. What about the pretend aid stations? I'd love to have you paint that picture.
Yeah. So I typically bring a cooler, and it depends on how long the run is. We typically be doing 4-hour runs this block. So we'll go out to somewhere really hot down in Bishop, a little bit south of Mammoth, and I'll have all my bottles set up in the cooler. I'll map out a route that's like an hour loop. I do try to make the loop different every time, so it's not too boring, but get back to the car, and get, all the bottles out, get in the cooler, quickly shove everything in, take a very prescribed amount of salt pills each time just to see like maybe a difference between every hour to see how much I should be taking on the sodium level. And yeah, I never carry anything more than I might need. So if I'm going out for an hour, I'm only going to bring 2 gels with me, and I'll just grab 2 new gels from that cooler, and just get out of there, try to get out of there as quick as possible.
Really, really interesting. Okay, so I'm sure we'll come back to more of those training insights in a little bit. But before we talk about this season, I'd love to start with UTMB from last year, because from memory, you really put yourself in the fight early in that race, running inside or near the top 10 for much of the first half of the event, at least. Tell us about UTMB. You ultimately finished 17th, or we should say, but tell us about UTMB and what you learned there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a rough day. So, I think.
But to me, the reason I asked is because I think to me and to a lot of us, it's felt like you've been on the precipice for a little while, right? And watching UTMB, that was an example of it. It's like, okay, Rod's in the mix, and then you faded to 17th.
Mm-hmm.
Black Canyon's not really an example of that, but like, because you finished 14th, but as you described earlier, it was because you sort of took this racing strategy of let the race come to you, don't assert yourself. But at UTMB, you did assert yourself, and you felt like you just faded, right? But ultimately, like, what's clear is that for a long time you've been on the precipice, and now you're over that precipice, which we'll get to here in a little bit. But I'd like to start with UTMB and how that sort of maybe led to you getting to the place where you are now.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting you bring that up, because I almost feel like that experience at UTMB caused me to race how I did at Black Canyon. That was like the first time I did try to put myself in the mix in a very competitive field. And in retrospect, like, there was a lot behind the scenes that went wrong that I could have done better. But in my eyes, after I finished that, I was almost like, you just raced strategically very poorly. Like, that shouldn't have been how you race. You shouldn't put yourself up there. There's going to be like a ton of carnage, and you can run into the field later on in the race if you just ran smart. And I think going back to that race, the reason I tried that more than anything is because I got 11th at Western States the year, or a couple months prior to that. So in 2023, and I implemented, that opposite strategy of like, let's sit for a bit and then just try to run into it. And I felt like if maybe I had, a few more miles, I might have been able to get into the top 10 that year, which was ultimately the goal. But, I felt like I just didn't put myself in the mix early enough and didn't really give myself the opportunity. So that, along with the combination of doing a big training block with Zach Miller a few weeks prior to UTMB, where, it's hard not to feed off his energy and like the way he runs and the way he races. I felt like I wanted to go out with him, and just given like we were able to train together, I felt like pretty confident about it. So I started the race and just, kind of followed lead and went with it. But I think in between then and Black Canyon, I didn't do a lot of really learning the nutrition side of things. And ultimately, I think I couldn't have, I had a terrible race at UTMB just because I have no idea what I ate. Like, I couldn't go back and tell you how much I ate an hour, or how much I drank, or what I was eating at the aid stations. And it's a very obvious thing, but it's hard to like get yourself to believe that was the issue versus like fitness being the issue or something like that. And so I think UTMB last year it was an important experience for me, but I think I got the wrong takeaways from it overall. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I actually haven't really reflected a lot on that.
Interesting. Yeah. All right, so we'll barely touch on Black Canyon. The thing that I'd love for you to talk about more than anything, you, as we've mentioned, sort of ran through the field, had a solid day, though imperfect. You still set a PR in the 100K, but it was only good enough for 14th. And it seems like that made you question whether you actually had the ability and potential to compete at the highest level to go for these golden tickets. And you wrote that afterwards, you and your coach had sort of a heart-to-heart phone call where there was a very important insight that was gained. Share that experience.
Yeah. The quote just stays with me forever. But he said, in a given training block, like an 8-week training block after training block, you're not going to get that much fitter. You're going to get like 1% to 2% fitter, arbitrary percentage. But the point is, you're not going to get a ton fitter in a small amount of time. Over years, you will, like just cumulative load, but you can't expect to just, after Black Canyon, be so much fitter after canyons. But you can make up a massive difference in the field if you take care of all the other little things and put a ton of attention to detail into the little things. And in our case, specifically, that was nutrition. He's been in my ear about pushing carbs at the highest threshold I possibly can for years. And I don't think I ever really took it to heart. I didn't really see myself as a person that could handle that much nutrition. But, after such a disappointing feeling after Black Canyon, I was finally ready to give it everything and try to pick up on all those little pieces outside of just training.
So this is something we talked about in our champions interview after canyons, but maybe be a little bit more specific about that and maybe tell our audience a little bit about Vic Johnson, the early initial conversations with him and what impact it's had on your training and performance.
Yeah, I went on a journey after Black Canyon with nutrition. It was it was quite the learning experience and a lot of like revelations. But so anyways, I wanted to focus on nutrition. Coincidentally, at the same time, good friend and basically family, Danny Moreno, she interviewed Vic Johnson for her podcast, Subhub, and she, I divulged everything to her. I was telling her I wanted to take nutrition more seriously. She was like, "Hey, just like talk to this guy. You should listen to this podcast. I think you guys would really connect." And I got in touch with Vic and I've never heard of the guy. I thought this was going to be like a kind of just like a very transactional relationship, but like immediately Vic and I, really hit it off. He's one of my closest friends now, I'd say, and like someone I can talk to about anything. But yeah, so I signed up for his program. It's like a 8-week program or a 16-week program. We meet every couple weeks. And we just like, he immediately asked like what I want out of this. And I think like the types of clients he gets, there's people that want like day-to-day nutrition advice. And then there's people that over time, want to be able to push how much they eat in racing and training. And I basically came into it. I was like, look, I have this race in 8 weeks. I have no time to lose. I just want to be able to eat as much as I can in a race. And I want to be confident that like putting 100 grams of carbs in my body an hour is not going to make me throw up. And we basically went to it from there, and we used every long run and every workout as an opportunity to push more and more carbs. We started at what I was doing at Black Canyon, and every week just got a little bit higher, maybe 10 grams of carbs higher. And in retrospect, like I was taking in 60 grams of carbs an hour at Black Canyon, thinking that was like a high amount, like a good amount for me, because I felt like it had worked at other races and I didn't throw up at that volume. But in his eyes, he was like, yeah, that's fine. Like a lot of people do that, but like the upper end of it could be like potentially double of that. And, I think I like went into it thinking I'd feel like magic having 100 grams of carbs an hour. Like I would be like unlock this like new potential in me, this new fitness in me. And it was never really like that. It was like, at the end of the day, we only ran for 4 hours in training, really, maybe 5 hours at the upper limit. But uh, what I what I was like very, skeptical about is like I actually felt exactly how I would have felt, eating 60 grams of carbs. And he's like, dude, just don't worry, just trust the process. Like where you're gonna really feel it is like hour 7, hour 8 of your race, and you're gonna see you have this extra gear at the end that like you normally wouldn't have. So the block training together just basically became about feeling good about taking in that volume of carbs. And then what was going to be the real test is just race day. So come race day at Canyons, he was right. Like, the pace stayed the same the whole time. I'd never experienced something like that. Again, like I didn't run any like faster from on a like a split level of any climb or anything like that than maybe I would have, but it's just like being able to sustain that energy throughout it. That was just like such a massive game changer. And I think also by the time I hit race day, I was bought in and I was confident that this was going to work. So I raced like that. I raced like I was going to have gears at the end of the race, and I didn't really care what I was doing earlier.
So cool. You also mentioned that you guys did a sweat test. This is just from memory. And you also began the conversation or mentioned earlier that when you're doing your laps in your contrived aid station transitions, you were doing some kind of testing with sodium and electrolytes too. And this is something that have always been fascinated about, feeling subjectively like I need more salt than the average person, but having never done a sweat test. What were some of the insights you gained from that?
Yeah, first thing I'd say is if you're feeling subjectively that's the case, it's probably the case. And you can really feel when you're, I think, under sodiumed and when you are really thirsty. But yeah, I just went for it. I got a test with Precision. They're kind of all over the country. You could probably find a center nearby you. You don't have to be a Precision athlete or anything. But yeah, I just went into a lab. I think it was in March, I was in the Bay. So I went to a lab in SF to get tested. And basically what they do is just test your concentration of sodium in a liter of fluid. So they, activate some sweat pads on you to get your glands going. And then based on the sample they collect, they could find the general sodium concentration. I found my number there. But it only tells half the story. Like I think a lot of people think they see their number and you have to replace, that number every hour necessarily. But a lot of times, like people, their sweat rate, like some people sweat at a much slower rate than other people. So, some people might sweat just half a liter an hour, and some people might sweat 1.5 liters an hour. And that can also change based on how hot it is or how dry it is or humid it is out. So, getting that number was half of the puzzle. The other half was finding out my sweat rate. So I would on long runs, I would, Tim was there with me, but before we started the run, I would bring a scale with me wherever we went, and I would weigh myself before the run, get fully naked, and just stand on a scale, figure out that weight, and then at the end of the run, do the same thing just to figure out the weight difference and figure out like there's a whole formula you can find online too, where you just plug in those numbers and it will tell you how many liters you're losing an hour. So now when you have that number, let's say in a perfect world, you were losing 1 liter an hour and you got that sweat concentration number. For me, it was like 1200 milligrams per liter. I know now that I'm losing 1200 milligrams per hour. But what I actually found was that like I was much closer to 1.5 to 2 liters an hour, even on like a cooler day, which is just like kind of insane because thinking back, I would just drink 1 bottle an hour. That's like 3 to 4 bottles an hour I was losing even on a cooler day. So really my sodium loss was closer to like almost 2,000 milligrams of sodium an hour. So you don't have to replace it 1-to-1, but like you should be replacing it and getting, close to getting all your minerals back in.
The game has changed so much in the last couple of years. I feel like I just talked to Tim Tollefson, like I mentioned, and one of the things we were saying is that in our day, in our era, it was, you could sort of coast off talent a lot more. And now, as you know, and as you exemplify, you have to both be talented and hyper intentional with every single one of these small details, which I think you're articulating beautifully here. And it makes me want to ask you about something else that Tim mentioned that you have opinions on, and that is super shoes in the sport. And after this, we're going to finally get to your amazing performances at Canyons and Western States. But I'd love to hear your opinions on super shoes and their impact in the trail running space.
Oh man, someone I'm not is someone who could speak to about this, but I do have an opinion on it. And I think on a course like Western States and a non-technical course that has a lot of straightaways and road mixed into it, and the trails are super buffed. I think having a very responsive shoe that is propulsive is going to give you no advantage. And it was, relevant, and the data is available. So the top 9 out of 10 at Western States were all wearing a super shoe, and it's hard to correlate versus decide if that's actually a factor there. But if the technology is there, I don't see why you shouldn't be utilizing it, and I don't see why you would knowingly give yourself a disadvantage, knowing that the top runners are putting these things on their feet. And kind of funny story, but at 2023 Western States, I was wearing a non-super shoe from North Face, and Katie Scheid was running up on me with the Vective Pro. This was right after Robinson Flat, and she just completely dusted me. And as she passed by, she's like, "I cannot believe you're wearing those shoes." And since then, I was like, "Oh man, I really gotta step this up, and I really gotta start thinking about these other little things." And it's just the pro mindset, right? And I don't think if you're someone who takes care of all the other things, and if you're someone who puts 100% of yourself into your training, why not go do that very minimal effort thing and wear a pair of the super shoes, or use a brand that is going to have a better shoe on that end. So it's a very easy thing. I TBD if the data is there yet, but I think we will soon see everyone be wearing them. And the evidence is there in the road marathon scene. And let's be honest, Western States is hardly, on the more technical trail side. So I think there's enough road section and enough flat and fast sections where you would see a similar correlation.
Yeah, well, even if the data is not there, just the anecdotal evidence of 9 out of 10 on the men's side. I think Tim said it was 17 out of 20 total.
Yeah.
So that would make 8 out of 10 on the women's side, all wearing carbon plated super shoes with some of that super responsive foam, something to monitor in the future. And yeah, it will be hard to control for the variability of different courses. And I think the interesting thing will be to see later in the summer how many super shoes are on the podium or in the top 10 at UTMB, or where you're going to be, Diagonal Day Fu, which is a very different race. We'll talk about that in a little while. All right, dude. So let's spend a lot of time now talking about Canyons and Western States, starting with Canyons. Let's just cut to the point where we saw each other on the course. It was just happenstance that I happened to jump in with you shortly after you had officially taken the lead, establishing yourself at the front of the race. I was out there just started trying to get some content. It turned out to be a front row seat to the decisive moment. And what I'd love to hear you talk about is that moment, because you sort of come in understanding you got to put yourself in the fight, which you write about on your blog. You take the lead and you're actually doing what you've promised yourself you're going to do. But at the same time, you're sort of this 28-year-old underdog taking the lead against some of the top athletes in the sport. So I'd love to hear you just talk about that moment and the mix of emotions that maybe were inherent with that tension of knowing the consequences of that move. It could be spectacular, could be completely idiotic.
I had nothing to lose. if I blew up, I blew up. I would have gotten 10th or 15th, but that's the same thing as getting third in my eyes there. Like, I was there for one goal, and that was to get a golden ticket. And I knew how I had to do that at this race. So I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I was really only thinking about holding this effort to the end. And, when you look at a start list before a race, it's really intimidating, definitely. But when you're 20 miles into a race, you have a sense of where you belong there, and you have a sense of where your fitness level is compared to everyone. And I think, like, I found out early in that race that I belong there, and, like, there's no reason I shouldn't win it.
You saying that you weren't thinking about the consequences makes me remember that you also wrote something about the importance of maintaining blankness of mind for performance. Enlighten the audience about that philosophy.
Yeah, I feel like Western States really took that. I took that to heart there, where I was not thinking about how far we had to go, and it allowed me to do things I don't think I ever would have done before in a race. And I distinctly, like, when I really think about this as an example, I was thinking about running down to El Dorado Canyon, and 50 miles into Western States with 50 miles to go. And I remember just dropping a 6:30 mile going down that and thinking, what am I doing? And then I was like, why not? You feel great. Your legs are there. So I think it is so important to stay present in how you're feeling in that moment. When you start to think about what you have left in front of you, you're gonna pull back, definitely. And you're gonna miss an opportunity that you had, I think, to really make a difference in the race. And obviously there's a huge chance you're going to blow up, but I don't think that specific move is going to be the big factor that makes you blow up. It's like downstream, how you might approach different areas of the race, or like maybe getting behind on fueling if you're not, like, really present in what you're doing. So, like, while I guess like the best way to put it is, like, there is opportunity to be reckless, but only if you feel good in that very moment to do something a little bit reckless. You can't approach the whole thing recklessly. You got to, like, really feel out your body and know what move to make. And that's where, like, staying present is going to be the most important thing.
But you also say something about, and I think you reference your coach here, about the idea that mental energy and thinking actually consumes energy, right? Or like something like that. Like your brain power consumes more glycogen than muscle power, or something like that. Am I touching on that right?
You did. Yeah, you touched on that right. And it was so funny because we were debriefing the race together, and he was just kind of like, had a great race. We debrief, we talk about all the things we could have done differently. So we, like, very much focused this call on, like, what went wrong and what we could have done to maybe win the race. And he was like, yeah. And then you started doing all this mental math at the end, which, like, when I heard you say you were doing that, you were really, like, wasting a lot of your glucose, because your brain takes a lot of energy to do that sort of math. And this was, like, specifically in reference to, like, how fast Hayden had to run to actually catch me at the end of the race. And that was, like, where my mind was entirely for the last 10 miles. So he was like, yeah, next time don't do that. You're just wasting energy for no reason.
Mind blankness is the key to success.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to get to Western States more specifically here in a sec, but maybe just to bridge the gap between Canyons and Western States. Canyons obviously was the biggest race of your career, the biggest result of your career to that point. And of course, you knew that there was no time to celebrate, that in 8 weeks you were going to have to back that up at Western States. Give us a sense of that final stretch, the recovery, the final build, and ultimately the physical, psychological position it left you in before Western States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It overall went well. Yeah. I think when you have a good race, like at Canyons, the reason you had a good race is because you did things right during the race, and, you probably fueled right. And I think that actually is, like, the biggest part of recovering after these races. It's like how well did you feel and support yourself during it. So I think I was able to bounce back fairly quickly. I took 1 week fully off and then jogged the next week. I was at a work event that week, so didn't have a ton of time to train. But once I got back, went kind of like fully into it, immediately jumped back to basically the exact type of training we were doing at Canyons, and kind of held that for the next 5 weeks. I think I was at 100 to 120 miles a week, in kind of the same format of just easy runs and a really hard VO2 workout during the week, and then a long run on the weekend, and strength intermixed in between. So overall, things felt really good. I think my biggest indicator that like I was really recovered was going to the training camp at Western States, or the training camp for Western States, and feeling really good on the course all day. And and just kind of like rolling that momentum into a taper.
Okay. So in your Western States race report, you described the psychology that you took to the start line with you. And I thought that this was a really, really interesting anecdote, and something that in hindsight feels like maybe the biggest contributing factor to what happened at Western States. So enlighten the audience about that psychological disposition that you brought to the start line with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is what you're referencing, but I really didn't care what happened. You know, I was going for broke, or I was blowing up, and I didn't see any difference. And it was kind of a similar mentality at Canyons, but in this context, I think it's a little bit, you know, holds more weight. But I didn't care if, you know, I got 10th in the race. Like for me, getting 11th the previous year, it felt close enough. You know, it didn't really feel like I was going to make a difference if I got 10th or 9th or 8th or 7th. You know, I wanted to get in there and make an impact on the race, and I wanted to be right up there trading blows with whoever decided to take it out, whoever it might have been. Could have been a blank face. You know, I just wanted to like do something big on that day, and I wasn't afraid of the consequences. Like I had no fear going into it. And it really drove like everything I did from a move perspective on the day.
So I'm just going to read a couple sentences here. What you said is, mentally, I felt confident, but also felt like nothing mattered. I felt like if I blew up, I wouldn't care. I came in knowing how I wanted to race, and if I was not going to be aggressive, I might as well not show up. I wanted to make a mark on this race, and running smart, picking people off on my way into the top 10 was not impactful enough for what I wanted. I don't know if there's anything else you want to say there, but I think that's a perfect like 4-sentence encapsulation of a really unique and interesting mindset to bring into a race, of just like not caring, you know, just like, I'm doing this, I'm going hard, I'm putting myself in the fight, fuck it, whatever happens, happens.
Yeah. And it's easier said than done when you're coming from, I think, where I'm coming from, which is like, you know, a no name. Maybe people know my name, and maybe people expect me to, you know, do something like that after seeing Canyons. But for the most part, people could not care less if I got 8th place or 18th place, you know. But like if someone like Hayden came into it where everyone is expecting the world with his result, and I think like you got to think, you know, it's hard to like disassociate from that narrative. And I think in the future now, coming into a race, I probably have higher expectations around me. So I'm curious to see how I approach that. I really hope, you know, I'm like, I don't give a fuck, and I'm still going to be me, and I don't care what the result is. But yeah, you don't know until you're in that situation.
So cool.
Yeah.
So another thing that you mentioned that I think is great is, you know, the fact that for decades people have said the race starts at Forest Hill, and you express something in your blog that I've tried to express on the live stream and in other places, that's just not the case anymore. And you make the argument that the race started at Lion Ridge this year, which is the first aid station on the course. Talk about that.
Yeah. I guess I'll just kind of walk through what happened, but I took the lead out of the escarpment and just ran the single track at my pace toward Lion Ridge. Eventually we had a small pack up front with me, Jim, and Tyler mostly. And I it was like all fun and games for a little bit, and then Jim took the lead and started putting a little bit of pressure on, but he would like kind of play it off. He's like, "Oh, I just want to get here to the aid station first and fill up my bottles first." And I was like, that's a good idea. It's gonna start bunching up very quick if we all go into the aid station together. So I kind of went with him. Tyler kind of went with us too. And when we got into that aid station, we all did our own thing, got in and out at our own pace, and it was me and Jim for a little bit up the climbs. And I think from there, like it is so like someone has to break the elastic, right? And like no one knows when that's going to be, but for Jim on that day, it was there, and he wanted to pull away there. I don't know his intention of like, did he want to go time trial or course record, or what was he doing? But all of a sudden, like the gas was on and he was hammering down these descents. And I think in the next 5 miles, he put like a 3-minute gap on everyone. So, so it was obvious what was going to happen. And it was obvious that we could either let him go there or we could start to race and see where we could get. And from there, me, Hayden, Dan got in a little pack and started working together. And I think eventually started pulling him back. And I think our decision on the day was just to go for it and go with him. And I think it's kind of funny, like looking at the results at the very end, where it's like it was Jim and then me, Hayden, and Dan. And what do you know? Like the end results are Jim, me, Hayden, Dan. So it's like, where was the race decided? Yeah. I don't know.
That's exactly what I was getting at, is just the fact that at the top level, I mean, you guys are all sussing each other out on that first climb up the escarpment. Everybody, even if it's not totally obvious, is using their peripheral vision and using their intuition to sense who's looking good, who's feeling strong, who's clearly fit. And the race does not start in Forest Hill. The race starts at the very beginning at this point in this era. And it sort of ties back to everything we've been talking about to this point, of that to perform at your highest level on the biggest stages, you have to be all in every aspect of your life and in a racing context from start to finish. One thing that I'm sure the audience would love to hear about, and that I recall from the broadcast, is the climb up Devil's Thumb, where on the broadcast, we had Bailey Kowalczyk there, who was our on-course correspondent, and Jim came through in first at Devil's Thumb, and he said, we were all together at the bottom. And you describe in your blog about this moment and how it was kind of a psychological wind in your sails at the bottom of that climb. So take us into that critical moment of the race.
Yeah. So where it really started to split up and I felt like I was in no man's land was around, I'd say Dusty Corner. So like around mile 38 before we start descending towards the last chance. At that point, Dakota had caught up as well. And him and I were running for a little bit, but he was through the aid stations quicker. And it just felt like people were running away from me. You just like don't know, because you have these long straightaways where you could see people, and when you can't see anyone, you could just assume they're gone super far. But really, they could just be around a bend. And I remember getting to the bottom of Devil's Thumb across Swinging Bridge. Cole had also caught up to me, so a little bit of a mental defeat there too. It was like I just felt like I was getting caught at this point, and I didn't feel the best either. So a lot of negative thoughts at that point. But we get across Swinging Bridge, and I look up and I see Hayden and Dan running. Like just as I get a glance at them, they're starting the climb, and then I'm like, okay, at least Hayden and Dan are there, but still kind of figured Jim was way up, and he had already won the race. So as I'm crossing too, I hear like this massive yelp, and Jim had just sat in a spring at the very bottom of the climb. So Hayden and Dan had actually passed him, and Jim is in third now, and or maybe even fourth, because I think Dakota might have passed him before he got up too. And I make the turn from Swinging Bridge, start the climb, and I basically see everyone. There's this line of 5 people starting the climb together, and I was just like, holy shit, this is insane. There's the top 5 estates. Cole is right behind me here. Who knows how many people are right behind me there? I figured, I don't know, you tell me, but like, what was the gap between like first and 10th there?
I mean, from memory, Jim had like 2 minutes at the top of the hill,
Okay.
but you guys all came through in quick succession. But I mean, the thing that I think is important here is the fact that the lead pack was still so closely packed at the bottom, at the Swinging Bridge and the climb up to Devil's Thumb, which is sort of like the sort of symbolic halfway point in the race. And that also that component of you feeling like you're getting caught from behind without knowing that actually, you know, you're still in contact with the lead of the race, and how that changes the racing dynamic and the strategy and the psychological, emotional disposition that you carry with you, because ultimately, you know, that probably put your head back in the game.
It did, definitely. And that climb up, it didn't make it feel any easier. It was definitely pretty tough. And I think we were all feeling it, just like trying to suss each other out, who was starting to hike, who was starting to run. And I think Jim ran the whole thing, but between like me, Hayden, and Dan, and Dakota, I think we were all like getting up at a pretty quick pace, and we got to the top of the climb, and I took my time to cool off a bit there, but it felt like a race for sure. Like, it felt like things were starting to get extremely serious, and there was like a big opportunity here to make a move in the canyons before getting to like the more runnable stuff. And that's like kind of how I want to approach it. I was really buying into, at this point, that fact to just do what, or that like mentality to just do what felt good in the moment. So I definitely did some crazy moves going downhill. I moved up to second. At the bottom of El Dorado, Dan was out of that aid station a little bit quicker, and he started the climb a little bit quicker than me, but we were like right together. And I decided to kind of hurt myself up this climb a little bit, because I wanted a solid second coming into Michigan Bluff just for the momentum. And I tried to run as much as I could. I think I put like a pretty solid gap on second and third there, or third and fourth there. And getting into Michigan Bluff, I still had no idea where Jim was. So that was a big question mark. I figured he was already out there, but coming in, I just went to where my crew was supposed to be set up at the very end. We did our quick pack swap, and I think that's where things got exciting, probably from the spectator side, and I was running out of there in first. So,
and then it became a 2-man race. Another insight I would love to have you share with the audience, and something that I've contended for a long time, is how crux these crew aid station transitions have become, and even non-crew aid station transitions have become. And Jim made the point, even in the post-race interviews on the track, about how you were really putting pressure on him. And you mentioned that, you were barely stopped 20, 30 seconds at each time. And obviously, we've also mentioned a couple of times here that you're doing the dress rehearsals in your training. We never really talk about this on the podcast, and I think it's something that's important for people to think about. So talk about the strategy for aid station transitions and how that ultimately allowed you to keep the pressure on Jim as long as you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear it after the fact too, because I thought everyone is doing this, truly. Like, I felt like I was behind before, and I had finally like caught up to what most of the field is doing. I always felt like there were a weakness when I looked at like my stoppage time in a race and looked at another person's stoppage time, and felt like an area. And going back to like my relationship with my coach and thinking about the areas we could improve that aren't necessarily just fitness, this was like a big one of them, and a big focus of ours. and it's not like, rocket science or anything. It's extremely simple. It's, we get into the aid station. Before I even enter, I'd be taking my pack off. So by the time I got there, I could just drop it. They had a preloaded pack with everything I needed to get to the next stretch, nothing more, nothing less. If it was an hour stretch to the next aid station, 3 filled up flasks. If it was longer than that, it would be the 3 filled up flasks for the hour, but then also some empty flasks with my nutrition powder that I specifically use in them. So when I hit an aid station that I needed to refill everything, I could still be using my own nutrition and just getting water from the aid station. And then the allotted amount of gels for however long that stretch might be. And I was doing a gel every 30 minutes. So whatever that might be. So that's what I was in the pack. Somebody was like swapping the pack. Somebody was tying the ice bandana on me. Another person was just when all this was going down, just dumping a gallon of water on my head. And that was it. Like, no exchanges. I always say I feel bad because like I never really hang out with my crew that I asked to drive 10 hours to go support me with. They just like do this and I'm like, bye. And, but it's all worth it in the end, and we could celebrate after. But yeah, it was just like very
you guys
focused.
Made history together.
Totally.
Couldn't have done it without him. You could catch up after the race. Yeah. I mean, it was really, I think, one of the competitive storylines of the day, and just from the commentary perspective on the live stream, seeing Jim make 2 or 3 different shoe changes and him making the comment after the fact about how you really were putting the pressure on him with your quick transitions. And then he had to make up significant margins after those efficient crew transitions that you are implementing. I think it's just an interesting thing for people to notice and to think about.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you listen to the, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say it, obviously I need to do that to keep up with Jim, but it's hard to say how fast Jim, can he is such a better runner than all of us in the field. Like just watching him run next to me or watching away from me, it's remarkable. Those aid stations for sure what I needed to do to even like give myself a chance. But it's hard to say if he didn't take those breaks and sit down and get really cool and swap all those things, could he still run at the same pace he's running at? And like, is it faster for him to take the breaks and run faster, or is it faster for him to run slower and take less breaks? It is really hard to determine, and really only he knows that. So I'm curious to see what he does moving forward and what his strategy will be. Yeah.
Fascinating thought experiment. Could he go sub 14 with ease, or if he rushes through, does he implode and drop out on Cal Straight? Really, really interesting.
Definitely.
Okay. I don't know if you listen to those sort of post-race debrief that I did with Tim, but he perfectly describes what was at least breaking news to me, which was the fact that arriving at the river, Jim was surprised to see you ahead of him. He was surprised, I think, first to see Tim Tollefson there, knowing that he was pacing you. And you also described this moment in your blog. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add to what you wrote or to what Tim described, but to me, that feels like one of the most fascinating moments in Western States history, the secretive pass that happened there on the sandy bottom section of Cal Street.
Yeah, all I can say really is I now know Jim's secret spot, and I'm gonna tell the world about it. No, I'm kidding. But I was so confused on what happened. I could not tell if he saw us and he was just trying to show how little he cared that we were passing him and decided to hop in the river, or if he didn't see us and thought he had a big lead. But I just hear about everything after the fact. In the moment, like, whatever, it happened. I didn't think anything about it. I knew he would catch me at some point because just how he was doing things. So I was just trying to stay focused when it happened. Tim was keeping me grounded. He was telling me not to worry about it. And I think like I was like this guy, like, what's he doing? Why is he messing with me so much? And Tim's just like, chill. Like he's getting warm just like anyone gets warm, and he needs to cool off. So I was like, okay, whatever. And when we were getting into the river and I heard Jim was there in the river too, I actually thought we had a much bigger gap. So when I heard that, I was a little upset and I had a little bit of a breakdown and rushed through that river crossing a little bit too fast, I think. Whereas, he's just such an expert and took his time floating in the river. I don't think he took a step in the river. He just floated himself across the rope with a life vest, really taking the time to cool down. And we had a minute lead coming to the bottom of the climb, but he makes it up so fast. Like those minutes, when you hear that with other people behind you, you might think you have it, but it was just incredible how fast he would close a minute. And I think like that's what I keep like thinking about. And it's like, is it because he took more time at those aid stations? Is it because he cooled off, or is he just like that much faster than me? And I think it's a combination of both, but I don't know. In the end, like that battle of Green Gate together was extremely special for my own experience. And like when I think when I look back probably in 10 years on my career and my place in the sport, I think I'll always think about that elbow to elbow moment with Jim going up to the Green Gate and having so many people like around us. There were people spraying Jim with water. There was film crews. There was Chris next to me taking videos, and like the vibe was just dead silent. And the tension was so high. Like I don't think anyone wanted to make a noise. No one wanted to like show a sign of weakness or anything. If Jim would like pull up a little bit, I'd pull up right next to him. I'd half wheel him. So it was like this energy on the climb of like what's going to happen next, and like who can keep up and who's going to blow up.
Absolutely incredible. Yeah. You described the decisive move that Jim made that ultimately was the elastic breaker. This is another fascinating description provided in your blog. For those who haven't read it, talk about that moment, because and maybe focus also on it feels like you have done some analysis about what you might have done differently next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the move happened at mile 83 to 84, about a mile and a half from ALT. So, not too long after entering Green Gate together. And I think I ended up exiting there 2.5 to 3 minutes in front of him. So we had a great gap, a minute per mile gap, I would say. And he came up on us up this pretty distant climb. If you run the course, it's really the one like longer climb between Green Gate and ALT. And he came up behind us, and historically during the race, when he would catch back up to me, he would sit for a little bit before passing. But this time he just decided to go, and he turned around while he passed and told me to come with him. And I was just like, how am I supposed to do that, man? And he was like galloping. He was like straight up galloping away from me. He was completely fresh. It's like he just started the race, and I'm like shuffling up this hill. I thought I was doing well. I thought I was running well. But yeah, I just had no response to it. And my analysis of, the lack of enthusiasm and the lack of response, it really came down to, I think, a combination of three things. Two things, I feel like I can control a little bit better. One of them just being my caffeine intake late stage. I feel like I wasn't really messing with that too much because I didn't want my stomach to turn, and I've overdone it with caffeine. But, coming into this next training block, I think that's something I'm going to be trying to push a little bit harder. I think a lot of people talk about it, and the research is there that it will help you. So I need to get better at that. And I also stopped taking in about 40 grams of carbs an hour. So I dropped my totals from 100 to 60, starting at mile 70. And I figured like from 10 hours of fueling at 100 grams of carbs an hour, I could probably back off a little. My drink mix was just not tasting good. My stomach was fine, which was a great sign. But I didn't want to sacrifice like how much I was hydrating and how well I was hydrating because my drink mix was not going down well. So I just decided to go to straight water in my gels. In retrospect, if my stomach was actually feeling pretty good, I should have upped it to one more gel an hour. So I was back up to 90 instead of going all the way to 60. So, you know, something that is so controllable that just bugs me that I didn't do. But you're just like, your faculties are just not working that late into a race. And just the thought of reaching for another gel is even so hard in itself.
You know, the more interesting counterfactual, in my opinion, was the thing that you speculated on. What if I just hung on his wheel for 30 seconds?
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that too. And easier said than done, being, you know, all recovered now. But yeah, it's bothersome. It's like, why did I have no more fight in me? You know, he clearly did. And I think I was just so mentally exhausted from so many lead switches between Michigan Bluff and there. And I was almost just relieved he was looking so good and feeling so good, because I was just like, you know what, he deserves it, and I will get a happy second place.
For God's sakes.
Yeah, exactly. But it is a crazy thought experiment, right? Like 15 seconds of just hanging on his heels, would I have mentally cracked him? And like, would he have stopped pushing quite as hard? Hard to say, but that's how he races. You know, he is very much a strategic racer, and he gets in people's heads. So I think there could have been something there, and yeah, it keeps me up at night for sure.
Well, dude, I mean, what an unbelievable, outstanding, historic performance, as you know. We can skip to the finish line now. Obviously, Hayden did make it interesting to the end.
Yeah.
But I freaking watched you collapse on the track and start vomiting immediately, sort of in this catatonic state. It was slightly disturbing, if I'm being honest. But what was so clear within a couple of minutes, once you'd all stabilized, was the respect that you guys all had for one another, each pushing each other to probably your best performances for all three of you guys, Jim, yourself, and Hayden. And what I would love to hear you talk about is, you know, with a couple weeks at least of perspective, you know, like how this changes the way you think about yourself and how it changes the way you think about your career and how ultimately this might change your life.
Yeah. The life part I haven't thought about too much yet, but it's definitely made me realize what I could do at Western States. And when we say Western States, but for me, it's everything, you know. And when I think about ultra running and when I think about the races I want to do and the races I want to win at, Western States is always the first one that comes to mind. And like, the rest are just kind of rounding out your resume. But for me, Western States is like the proving ground. And if I have that special day there, and you know, if I win that race, I've won ultra running in my eyes. You know, that's how I approach this race, and I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with that, and especially international people. But that's what this race means to me. So never in a million years did I really think there was a shot at that. You know, you daydream about it, but it's never on the radar. It's like top 10, sick. That'd be awesome. But yeah, like when I line up now, and I think I will line up until I can't anymore. I'm going to be thinking about winning this race, and I don't know how long that's going to take. And yeah, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm going to keep trying. And I think it's like my North Star in sport. And it's kind of crazy just saying the word career now, but like career. And I think I ultimately want to make it that. So.
Amazing, dude. Well, congratulations. Just an unbelievable thing for us all to witness. And I hope, you know, this does help you in a lot of different ways. And kind of speaking of that, one of the other themes that I talked about with Tim is your willingness to bet on yourself. And I've heard that you passed on sponsorship, choosing to, you know, bet on yourself and bet on future opportunities. I heard also you passed recently on a new job opportunity that would have moved you to the Bay Area, I think, and betting on yourself and your running and really wanting to double down on what you're passionate about. Expand on that for the listening audience, because I think it's something we can all learn from.
Yeah. Yeah. It's humbling, I think, to talk about a little bit. And I guess I don't really know where to start with that, but I come from an area of opportunity too, right? So I think it's unfair for me to say like I completely bet on myself, like, because I don't have much to lose. I have a stable job. I'm very privileged, and like I don't. If I didn't take a sponsorship before Western States, it's not like I would have been in the gutter. So I think for me, like I just want to see what I can do, and I want to see like my maximum potential in this thing. And I was in a place where I could have accepted a sponsorship, and it was a really generous offer. And I think it still would have been on the table. And I just wanted to see where else I could take it, and I'm hyper curious about what I could do from a potential standpoint, and where my value really is in this world. Like I could have taken a job in San Francisco, right, too, and moved to the Bay, but would I be doing what I'm meant to be doing? I don't know. Like maybe it is, but maybe if I had this big race at Western States, I could also figure out if maybe I should be doing this, and maybe this is where I can add the most value to society and my community. And it's not just the racing, but it's the storytelling you could bring with that. And it's the person you can be that people look up to. I think a lot of people can resonate with my story as well, coming from, not being very well known in the sport and not having like massive results, but just slowly chipping away at it and slowly learning throughout putting myself in there and keeping showing up. And yeah, I think there is a million me's in the world. And I think, all I hope is like one person can do that too, and can rise to this level. And I hope like all my competitors and colleagues and friends can also see gaps where, they could close that will make them destroy me in the long run. And I think that's just the story I want to tell. And I want to I want to fully embody that. And it takes saying no to some things in order to fully maximize that potential that you have.
I love orienting things around that question of, am I doing what I'm meant to be doing? Am I doing what my purpose is here on planet Earth? A good way to clarify things. And I think there are a lot of people who will resonate with your story, going back to the beginning, you saying that you were not a remarkable athlete, but you were willing to put in the work. Here you are, 28 years old, having been an unremarkable athlete, but putting in the work for a decade plus. And you ran fucking 14:24 at Western States. Unbelievable. Something that we can all identify with, of just keep grinding. Eventually the breakthrough comes. We'll wind down with my closing question, but before we do, I know that you're next going to be racing the Diagonal des Fous, the Grand Raid on Reunion Island. So maybe just share, with the listeners, goals at Diagonal des Fous, further off in the future, where people can expect to see you racing this year and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Primarily, I want to finish the race. I think if I finish the race and I just do what I need to do, I will end up in a good spot there. So I think like loose goal, I want to, podium. I think after this race, any race I go to, my goal is going to be to podium. And, it might be cocky or whatnot, but I think like anything can happen. And if you don't at least have that goal, it's never going to happen. So A goal, podium, B goal is whatever, just go finish the race. And I think that's always how I'm going to approach racing from now on. Yeah. So, you inspired me to go do that race. I think like your video is incredible, and I love challenges, and it just seemed like the ultimate challenge that wraps everything together. And it's a great way to close out a big year of very competitive racing and very specific detail oriented racing. I just want to have a good time and as much of a good time as I can. So
it's a different ball game down there.
For sure. Yeah. And I'll have to pick your brain more about it offline, but
yeah. We're going to schedule our Zoom call where I'm going to give you all the gory details of my race there and what you can expect, but I can't wait to see you go down there. It's truly a spectacular event also.
Thanks, man. Yeah.
Rod, it's been so fun to have you on the pod, man. I'm so grateful that you'd go super long form like this. I love reading everything that you write. I hope you continue to do that. I always close these conversations with the same question. That is, who is one person that you admire? Can be inside or outside of sport, living or dead. Why do you admire that person?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We have talked about him a bit on this pod already, but I am going to go with Tim Tollefson. And it is not so much about what he's done in sport, even though I very much admire what he's done in sport, but it's what he's done outside of sport and his approach to life, really. Like, he's a guy who had a very, very stable and great career as a PT, balancing being a pro runner, but coming back to just like maximizing your value in the world and what you should be doing. I think he figured out that he has this incredible ability to bring community together. And the way he could do that is really go all in on Mammoth Trail Fest and bring the local community together, bring people who from Florida who have never run up a mountain before to figure this crazy puzzle out. So he went all in on it, and it is an incredibly hard thing to do when you're stable, have a good job, and later on in your life to make such a massive pivot like that and go all in. It's just like incredibly inspiring for me as someone who I feel like I've built like a solid career outside of sport. And now I'm trying to juggle like figuring out what would be best for me to do to be a contributing member of society. It's not always where the paycheck is. It's really where you can be maximizing really your what you're doing on a more passionate level. And I think you embody that too, Devo. Like, I admire you, man, for starting Freetrail and like leaving also a stable career to do this thing. And anyone who does that in the world has like my vote. And I have so many mentors and peers who have done that, and I feel incredibly lucky to be surrounded by them and have like great influences in my life.
What a perfect place to close it down. And I'd love to just share with you also that when I talked to Tim, he basically was espousing the same sentiment about how much he admires you and about how you've made him motivated to think about his own running in a new way. And it's just another great example of the value of thinking about, what am I actually meant to be doing? What do I want to be doing? Where can I have the biggest impact? And he has certainly also embodied that with his career pivot, as you described, something I aspire to do too. Rod, congratulations on this amazing season that you're having so far. Good luck at Diagonal Day Fu, and thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks so much, Devo. Love you, man.